For 30 years, Charles Kuralt was the warm, folksy voice of CBS, a man the entire country trusted like a father. But the second his heart stopped, a secret door in Montana swung open, revealing a second family, a hidden estate, and a 30-year lie that would leave his legal heirs with $1 million bill they never saw coming. Imagine, for a moment, the ultimate American grandpa. The man who traveled the backroads of the country in a battered motorhome, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. That was Charles Kuralt. Through his iconic On the Road segments and his legendary tenure hosting CBS News Sunday Morning, he built a bulletproof brand of integrity. He was the absolute antithesis of the slick, cynical, fast-talking coastal media elite. He was safe. He was pure Americana. People did not just watch him, they believed in him. They felt like they intimately knew him. But psychology has a specific term for what happens when the public persona of a revered figure is revealed to be a meticulously constructed facade. It is called the wholesome betrayal paradox. When a predictable rock star gets caught in a hotel room scandal, it barely makes a ripple in the cultural consciousness because it perfectly aligns with our baseline expectations. But when the Mr. Rogers of journalism is exposed as a master of deception who successfully orchestrated a vast, dual existence for nearly 3 decades, that fundamentally breaks the psychological contract we have with our heroes. And Charles Kuralt's double life was not just a brief, momentary lapse in judgment. It was a sprawling, incredibly expensive, highly coordinated logistical masterpiece of betrayal. And it was all funded by the exact same folksy, neighborly image he was selling to the American public. To truly understand the sheer magnitude and the operational complexity of this deception, we have to rewind the clock to the year 1968. Charles Kuralt was already a rapidly rising star, 6 years into his second marriage to a woman named Susanna Baird, known to everyone as Petty. She patiently waited for him in their upscale New York City home while he crisscrossed the nation for the network. That year, his travels brought him to Reno, Nevada, to cover a local grassroots story about a woman who had spearheaded the creation of a neighborhood park. Her name was Patricia Shannon. The connection between the television star and the local organizer was instantaneous. But rather than indulging in just a fleeting road romance, Kuralt initiated what modern psychologists refer to as a split-self affair. This is not just traditional cheating. This is a profound, structural segmentation of identity. In New York, Kuralt played the role of the dutiful husband, the polished intellectual, and the corporate heavyweight. But out west, with Patricia Shannon, he constructed an entirely different reality from the ground up. For the next 29 years, while his legal wife had absolutely no idea, Kuralt essentially acted as a shadow husband and father. This was not just a casual, weekend fling. The financial receipts alone paint a staggering picture of a fully funded alternate universe. He paid for Patricia's children to go to college. He funded her education at a prestigious design school. He provided her with the crucial seed money to start her own business. He bought her real estate in Ireland. And then, he built the ultimate architectural hideaway, a breathtaking, secluded estate nestled right along the legendary Big Hole River in Twin Bridges, Montana. It featured an initial 20 acres with a custom-built cabin, plus an adjacent 90-acre parcel containing a beautifully renovated historical schoolhouse. It was Kuralt's ultimate sanctuary. When he wanted to escape the crushing, suffocating pressure of network television and his Manhattan life, he would fly to Montana, stand knee-deep in a world-class trout stream, and play house with a family that did not legally exist. He even brought Patricia's son along on official CBS assignments and political conventions, parading the boy around in plain sight to his colleagues. For nearly 30 years, he successfully kept these two worlds spinning in perfectly isolated orbits, managing separate finances, separate travel logs, and separate emotional bandwidths long before the era of digital tracking. He was a man who literally belonged to two entirely different realities. But lies, no matter how well-funded or carefully managed, have a strict expiration date. Now, right here is where most secret double lives slowly unravel. Usually, the deceiver gets sloppy. A careless phone call is overheard, a mysterious credit card bill arrives in the mail, or a suspicious hotel receipt is found in a coat pocket. But Charles Kuralt was far too smart for that. He kept the secret completely safe all the way until the very last days of his life. But what he absolutely did not realize was that a few frantic words, scribbled on a cheap notepad in a sterile hospital room, were about to ignite one of the most explosive, precedent-setting legal thrillers in modern American history. Because when the walls finally closed in on Charles Kuralt, he didn't just leave behind a grieving widow and a shocked mistress. He left behind a smoking gun letter that would drag both of his lives into a brutal million-dollar courtroom war, forcing a Supreme Court judge to decide who actually owned the legacy of America's favorite storyteller. What was actually written in that letter, and how did it manage to legally rob his legitimate children of their rightful inheritance? In the early summer of 1997, Kuralt's invincible facade began to crack. He was diagnosed with lupus, and his physical health rapidly and violently deteriorated. He was admitted to a hospital in New York City, thousands of miles away from his Montana hideaway and his shadow family. Exhausted, terrified, and sensing that the end was rapidly approaching, Kuralt took out a pen on June 18th and wrote a deeply personal letter to Patricia Shannon. The exact, precise wording of this letter is critical to everything that happened next, because every single syllable would later be dissected by high-priced estate lawyers in open court. He wrote, "Something is terribly wrong with me. I will have the lawyer visit the hospital to be sure you inherit the rest of the place in Montana, if it comes to that." A few short weeks later, on the 4th of July, Charles Kuralt died of heart failure at the age of 62. He was buried in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, right next to a plot reserved for his legal wife, Petty. The American public mourned the loss of a television giant. The network aired glowing, tear-jerking tributes. But in the shadows of the American West, Patricia Shannon held that hospital letter in her hands. To her, it was not just a tragic goodbye note from a dying partner. It was a binding property deed. Under Kuralt's official, formal 1994 will, the ironclad document prepared by expensive New York attorneys, his entire estate, including the incredibly valuable 90-acre Montana fishing retreat, was left exclusively to his legal wife and his 2 daughters from a previous marriage. But Patricia Shannon took that June 18th hospital letter and marched straight into a Madison County, Montana courthouse to formally file for ancillary probate. She boldly claimed to the legal system that those casually scribbled lines constituted a valid holographic will. A holographic will is a handwritten legal document that, in certain jurisdictions, can completely supersede a formal, heavily lawyered estate plan. Suddenly, overnight, Kuralt's 30-year lie exploded into the public record. You have to try and imagine the absolute, soul-crushing devastation for his legal family. Not only are they grieving the sudden, tragic loss of their beloved patriarch, but they are simultaneously discovering through court filings that for 3 decades, he had a completely separate life, a separate partner, and was pouring massive, unaccounted amounts of their family's wealth into a secret Montana sanctuary. And now, the woman from the shadows was aggressively trying to take the million-dollar crown jewel of that sanctuary away from them. The legal battle that ensued, which became formally known in legal textbooks as In Re Estate of Kuralt, morphed into a massive public spectacle. Kuralt's legitimate daughters, who had to take over the agonizing legal fight after their mother Petty sadly passed away in 1999, fiercely argued that the hospital letter was not a legally binding will. Their lawyers brilliantly pointed out the exact phrasing of his own words, "I will have the lawyer visit the hospital." Legally, they argued, this was merely a statement of future intent. Kuralt was simply expressing that he planned to make a will at some point in the future, not that the letter itself was the binding document. If a highly educated, world-traveled journalist knew how to write a valid handwritten will, he would not have explicitly stated that he needed to call a lawyer to do it. The defense was incredibly strong, heavily rooted in established legal precedent. The initial district court judge even agreed with the daughters, officially ruling that the letter lacked clear testamentary intent. It looked as though the shadow family was going to be left out in the cold, completely erased from the legal record. But this is exactly where the sheer audacity of the shadow life took over the courtroom and flipped the entire legal system on its head. Patricia Shannon's legal team, led by a highly skilled Montana attorney, refused to back down and appealed the decision all the way to the highest authority in the state, the Montana Supreme Court. And they did not just argue the dry semantics of the law, they put Charles Kuralt's entire hidden double life on trial. Because holographic wills, these strange, handwritten, unwitnessed documents, often lack clear legal terminology, courts are sometimes legally allowed to look at extrinsic evidence. This means a judge can bring in outside, real-world context to determine what the deceased person actually meant in their final days. Patricia Shannon took the witness stand and systematically dismantled Kuralt's wholesome, family man public image, piece by brutal piece. She entered deeply intimate, personal love letters directly into the permanent court evidence. She read aloud a poem Kuralt had written specifically for her one Christmas titled What I Will Give You, which promised her a string of pearls, a suit and sweater, a mixing bowl, a butcher's knife, and finally, my life. She testified under oath about how they had explicitly planned to formally transfer the property in September of that year, but his sudden, catastrophic illness accelerated the timeline. By turning their deeply hidden intimacy into cold, hard, admissible legal exhibits, Shannon painted a vivid, undeniable picture of a man desperate to secure the financial future of his secret partner before his failing body gave out. In a massive, shocking reversal that stunned the legal community, the Montana Supreme Court ultimately ruled in Patricia Shannon's favor. They officially determined that because Kuralt was in a state of extreme, terminal illness and anticipating his own death, the letter did, in fact, express his present, immediate intent to transfer the property. The Shadow family won the war. Patricia Shannon was legally awarded the 90 acres, a breathtaking property valued at well over $600,000 at the time, leaving Kuralt's legal heirs with absolutely nothing but staggering legal fees and a forever tarnished, incredibly painful memory of their father's true legacy. This landmark case did not just rewrite property law and probate precedents in the state of Montana. It currently serves as a fascinating masterclass in the psychological framework of the split-self affair and the very real phenomenon of disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief, a critical term coined by behavioral scholars, refers to a type of mourning that society actively refuses to recognize, validate, or support. Think about the stark contrast of the situation. When Charles Kuralt died, the entire world sent their deepest condolences to Petty, his legal wife. Over 1,000 letters a day poured into the CBS headquarters from grieving fans. But Patricia Shannon, the woman who had spent nearly 3 decades intimately connected with the man, who had shared his absolute darkest moments and built a physical home with him from the ground up, was legally and socially forced to remain entirely silent. She was not allowed to attend the main public funeral. She was not mentioned in a single mainstream obituary. In American culture, we simply do not extend our sympathy to the other woman, especially when she boldly steps out of the shadows and starts laying aggressive legal claim to highly valuable marital assets. In 2002, Patricia Shannon attempted to reclaim her stolen narrative by publishing a revealing memoir titled Charles and Me, Notes in the Margin. In its pages, she fiercely and unapologetically rejected the dismissive label of mistress, arguing passionately that her relationship with Kuralt was a legitimate, deeply committed marriage in absolutely everything but a legally binding state document. She highlighted the incredibly tragic paradox of a man whose literal, highly paid professional job was to travel the country and uncover the authentic, honest truths of everyday Americans, yet who spent his entire adult life desperately running from his own truth. The sheer cognitive dissonance required to maintain that level of deceit for 30 years is staggering to even comprehend. Therapists who study these cases note that individuals who live prolonged double lives often suffer from intense, debilitating internal fragmentation. Kuralt had to meticulously, obsessively compartmentalize his sprawling finances, his erratic travel schedules, and his limited emotional bandwidth. Every single time he went on national television, looked directly into the camera lens, and delivered his famously folksy, neighborly wisdom, he was actively, consciously suppressing the reality of his deeply fractured, deceptive existence. Ultimately, the incredibly dark story of Charles Kuralt's 30-year lie forces us to confront a very uncomfortable, unsettling reality about the famous public figures we so easily idolize. The warm, avuncular, universally beloved grandfather of American television was, in actual fact, a highly calculated master manipulator who successfully orchestrated a dual reality that would have completely broken a lesser man. He built a massive, enduring fortune telling the simple, honest, heartwarming stories of America, while his own personal story was a tangled, chaotic web of deceit, hidden bank accounts, courtroom drama, and shadow families. It proves unequivocally that no matter how much you think you know someone through a glowing television screen, the reality behind their closed doors, or behind the heavily locked gates of a secret Montana compound, can be entirely, terrifyingly different. The wholesome betrayal paradox serves as a permanent reminder that the absolute brightest public halos often cast the darkest, longest private shadows. And if a man universally trusted by millions of people could successfully hide a massive, 30-year secret right under the nose of the media, it begs the ultimate, chilling question. What are the other legendary icons of our culture currently keeping buried just out of sight? If you want to dive even deeper into how public figures expertly manipulate their image to hide shocking, unbelievable truths, you need to hear the story of how one of the biggest names in Hollywood orchestrated an even wilder cover-up. Stick around, because that story completely redefines the meaning of a double life.